Stalin's speech of February 9, 1946, the first declaration of the Cold War. Historical context. In early 1946, the world was just beginning to recover from the devastation of World War II. The alliance between the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, forged out of necessity against a common enemy, was beginning to show its first significant fractures. On February 9, 1946, on the eve of elections to the Supreme Soviet, Joseph Stalin delivered a speech to voters in the Moscow electoral district bearing his name. This speech was not simply an electoral campaign event. It represented the first major statement of the Soviet position in the post-war world. Although it is difficult today to access the complete original text, the known fragments and historical analysis allow us to understand its fundamental importance as one of the catalysts of the Cold War. The central fragment, one of the most significant and verified fragments of the speech, states, "Now victory means, first of all, that our Soviet social system has won, that the social system has passed the test of fire in the war, and has proven its complete vitality. The Soviet social system has proven to be more capable of living and more stable than a non-Soviet social system. The Soviet social system is a better form of organization of society than any non-Soviet social system. Our Marxists declare that the capitalist system of world economy contains elements of crisis and war, that the development of world capitalism does not follow a steady and uniform path forward, but proceeds through crises and catastrophes. The uneven development of capitalist countries leads, over time, to great disturbances in their relations, and groups of countries that consider themselves inadequately provided with raw materials and export markets often try to change this situation and change their position through armed force. If we provide our scientists with the necessary help, they will know not only to reach, but also to advance in the near future the results achieved by science beyond the borders of our country. Analysis of content. Stalin's speech, even in this partial fragment, contains several key elements that would define the Soviet position in the nascent Cold War. 1. Declaration of ideological superiority. Stalin explicitly proclaims not only the military but systemic victory of the Soviet model, declaring it more capable of living, more stable, and a better form of organization of society. This ideological triumphalism signaled that the USSR did not consider its system as a temporary or experimental alternative, but as the inevitable historical successor to capitalism. 2. Theory of the inevitability of capitalist conflict. Drawing on Marxist-Leninist theory, Stalin characterizes capitalism as intrinsically unstable and prone to crises and catastrophes. This deterministic view suggested that the West was doomed to new internal conflicts, thus justifying Soviet expansion as a stabilizing force. 3. Veiled warning about scientific capabilities. The reference to Soviet scientists soon advancing beyond the borders of the country was a barely veiled allusion to the Soviet nuclear program and other military scientific capabilities. In February 1946, the United States still maintained the nuclear monopoly, but Stalin was signaling that this advantage would be temporary. 4. Justification for expansion. By characterizing capitalist powers as natural aggressors who would use armed force to obtain resources and markets, Stalin was preparing the rhetorical ground to justify Soviet control over Eastern Europe as a necessary defensive measure. The repercussions of the speech. The impact of Stalin's speech was immediate and profound. Western response. The long telegram. Just 2 weeks later, on February 22, George Kennan, an American diplomat in Moscow, sent his famous long telegram, analyzing the Soviet position and outlining what would become the containment policy. The Iron Curtain speech. On March 5, 1946, Winston Churchill delivered his historic speech in Fulton, Missouri, where he warned that from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Policy acceleration. The speech directly contributed to the formulation of the Truman Doctrine, 1947, the development of the Marshall Plan, 1947, the intensification of the arms race, the formation of military alliances, NATO in 1949, Warsaw Pact in 1955. The speech in historical context. Although delivered before the term Cold War became popularized, Stalin's speech of February 9, 1946, is considered by many historians as the first explicit statement of the Soviet position in this conflict. It represented a turning point where latent tensions between former allies emerged to the surface. Stalin's words made it clear that the Soviet Union 1. Had no intention of withdrawing from territories occupied during the war. 2. Considered Western capitalism as a fundamental ideological enemy. 3. Was prepared for a global competition for influence and power. 4. Saw confrontation with the West as inevitable and determined by historical forces. Conclusion. Despite the difficulty of accessing the complete original text, Stalin's speech of February 9, 1946, remains a historical document of fundamental importance for understanding the origins of the Cold War. In it, Stalin articulated a vision of the post-war world marked by ideological confrontation and competition between systems, setting the tone and justification for decades of tension between East and West. This speech was not simply a reaction to Western policies, but a proactive declaration of Soviet intentions that helped crystallize the world division that would characterize the second half of the 20th century.